I am 60 years old, and I used to believe that the worst pain in life came from losing someone. I was wrong. The worst pain comes from being erased by someone who is still standing right in front of you, smiling. While the people who are supposed to love you clap for your humiliation. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I live in a quiet town outside Asheville, North Carolina, in a house my late husband Walter and I built plank by plank over 31 years of marriage. Walter passed 6 years ago from a heart attack in the garden, holding a pair of pruning shears, tomatoes still warm from the sun scattered around him. I found him there. I have never fully left that spot in my mind. Some part of me is always kneeling in that garden. We had one son, Nathaniel. I named him after my father. A quiet man who believed a person's worth was measured by how he treated the people who could do nothing for him. I raised Nathaniel to be that kind of man. For most of his life, I believed I had succeeded. Then he married Brooke. I want to be fair. Because fairness is something I have always tried to hold on to, even when it costs me. Brooke was not cruel in the beginning. She was polished, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood who mattered and who didn't. In the early years I mattered. I was Mom Whitfield at Thanksgiving, the woman whose peach cobbler recipe she asked for twice and never once made. I told myself that was fine. Not everyone shows love the way I do. But something shifted after Walter died. I noticed it first in small ways, the way Brooke's eyes moved past me at family gatherings, the way she would answer a question I asked Nathaniel before he could open his mouth. The way birthday cards stopped coming, then Christmas cards, then invitations that used to say, and Mom started arriving with just Nathaniel and Brooke's names on the envelope, as if I were an afterthought they occasionally remembered to include. I told myself grief made me sensitive. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself a lot of things. Because the alternative, that my son's wife had decided I was a burden to be managed rather than a mother to be honored, was too heavy to carry alone. Then came the night of Nathaniel and Brooke's 10th wedding anniversary. They rented out the ballroom at the Ashbourne Country Club, the kind of place with crystal chandeliers and a string quartet tucked into the corner like part of the wallpaper. 40 guests. Colleagues from Nathaniel's law firm. Brooke's book club friends, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my sister Carol and me. The mother of the groom, seated at table 6, near the kitchen doors, 3 tables back from where I expected to be. I noticed the seating chart before I noticed anything else. Small thing. I told myself it didn't matter. I wore the blue dress Walter always said made me look like trouble in the best way. I brought a gift, a photo album I had spent 4 months putting together, pictures of Nathaniel from infancy through his wedding day, each one captioned in my handwriting. I thought it would mean something. The dinner went fine. Polite conversation. A few toasts. Nathaniel's toast to Brooke was lovely, genuinely. He is a good writer, my son, and he made the room laugh and then made Brooke cry, the good kind of crying. I clapped along with everyone else. Proud, despite the ache sitting low in my chest all evening. Then Brooke stood up to give her toast. She thanked her parents. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked Nathaniel for putting up with her for a decade, which got a warm laugh from the room. And then she turned, glass in hand, and looked directly at me. And I want to thank Eleanor, she said, for teaching me so much about what kind of mother-in-law I don't want to be. The room made a sound. Not quite laughter, not quite silence, that terrible in-between noise a crowd makes when it isn't sure if it's allowed to laugh yet. Brooke smiled, waiting. I mean this with love, she continued. But Eleanor has spent 10 years reminding me that I'll never cook as well as her, never dress as well as her son deserves, never quite belong the way a real Whitfield does. She once told me my roast was interesting. She still calls my haircut a phase. She held on to Walter's house like it was a museum and made me feel like a guest in my own husband's family. So Eleanor, thank you, truly. You taught me exactly the kind of mother-in-law I want to be for my own children one day. The opposite of you. The room laughed, not everyone, but enough that the sound filled the ballroom and pressed down on my chest like a physical weight. None of it was true. Not one word. I never once criticized her cooking beyond a gentle, honest opinion given when she asked for it. I never mocked her hairstyles. I had, in fact, cried tears of joy the day Nathaniel told me he was marrying her, because I saw how happy she made him, and happiness was the only thing I had ever wanted for my son, but it didn't matter whether it was true. It was funny. It was clever. It landed exactly the way she intended it to land. As a joke at my expense. Dressed up as a toast, delivered in front of 40 witnesses who had no context and no reason to doubt her. And then I looked at my son, Nathaniel. My Nathaniel, the boy I had rocked through fevers. The boy whose little league games I never missed even when I was working 2 jobs after his father's first layoff. The boy who once told me at 9 years old that when he grew up he was going to buy me a house with a garden bigger than the whole state. My son lifted his glass, and he laughed, and he clapped. He applauded. I sat at table 6, in my blue dress, with a photo album full of his whole life sitting untouched on the seat beside me, and I watched my son clap for his wife's public humiliation of his mother. 40 people clapped with him. The string quartet, God help them, kept playing softly underneath it all, some sweet, oblivious waltz, as if the moment deserved a soundtrack. I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I did not cry in that ballroom. Though something in me broke so cleanly and so completely that I felt it as a physical sensation, like a rib cracking, I smiled instead. I lifted my own glass a few inches off the table, a gesture that could be mistaken for participation. And I sat very still until the toasts were over. My sister Carol found me 20 minutes later in the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine off, hands folded in my lap like I was praying, though I wasn't. Carol didn't ask what happened. She had seen it too. She got into the passenger seat, took my hand, and said the only thing that made any sense to say. "Eleanor," she said, "that boy just showed you exactly who he's become. Don't you dare pretend you didn't see it." I drove home alone that night, past the exit for the cemetery where Walter is buried, and for one long, terrible mile I considered pulling in, sitting by his grave, and asking him what I was supposed to do, now that our son had chosen a stranger's cruelty over his own mother's 40 years of love. I didn't stop the car, I kept driving, but somewhere on that dark stretch of highway, something in me hardened into a decision, even though I didn't yet know what the decision was. I just knew that something had to change, and I knew, with the strange cold clarity that sometimes follows the worst moments of our lives, that I was the only one who was going to change it. Grief has stages. Humiliation, I have learned, has stages too. The first stage was disbelief. For 3 days after the anniversary party, I replayed the toast on a loop in my mind, searching for an angle where it meant something different than what it obviously meant. Maybe Brooke was nervous and it came out wrong. Maybe Nathaniel clapped out of reflex, the way you clap when everyone around you is clapping, without really hearing the words. I am a mother. We are professional excuse makers for the people we love. It is, perhaps, our most dangerous skill. The second stage was the phone call. I called Nathaniel 4 days after the party. My voice was steady. I had practiced it in the mirror, which is a humiliating thing to admit at 60 years old, but grief makes children of all of us. "Nathaniel," I said, "I need to talk to you about Brooke's toast." There was a pause on the line. And in that pause I heard everything I needed to know. "Mom, come on," he said. "It was a joke. Everybody knew it was a joke." "It wasn't a joke, Nathaniel. It was a list of things I never did, said in front of 40 people, and you clapped." "You're being sensitive. Brooke didn't mean anything by it." "You clapped," I said again, because that was the wound that wouldn't close. Not Brooke's words. I could have absorbed those, eventually, the way you absorb weather. It was my own son, lifting his glass, laughing, joining in. "I clap at toasts, Mom. That's what you do at a wedding anniversary. I wasn't thinking about you specifically, I was just..." He stopped. Even he heard how that sounded. "Look, I'll talk to Brooke. Can we just move past this? It's been 4 days. Sophie has a piano recital next week. Are you still coming?" Sophie is my granddaughter, 12 years old, the brightest light in my life since Walter died. Of course I was still coming. That is the particular cruelty of loving people who hurt you. The hurt doesn't cancel the love, it just sits next to it, and you carry both at once, forever, like 2 suitcases in each hand. "I'll be there," I said. And I hung up before my voice could betray me. He did not talk to Brooke. Or if he did, it changed nothing. At Sophie's piano recital the following week, Brooke greeted me with a hug so brief it barely qualified as contact, said, "Eleanor, so glad you could make it," in the tone you'd use with a distant co-worker, and spent the rest of the evening orbiting a cluster of other mothers, laughing at something on someone's phone, never once looking my way. Nathaniel sat beside his wife. I sat 2 rows back, beside Carol, who had come with me because she said, quite rightly, that no one should walk into a room like that alone twice in 1 month. Sophie played beautifully. Debussy. Something slow and aching, that suited the evening far better than anyone in that auditorium could have known. Afterward, she ran to me first, threw her arms around my waist and said, "Grandma, did you see? I only messed up once." And for a moment, just a moment, the evening was bearable. Then I overheard something I was not meant to hear. I had stepped into the hallway outside the auditorium to find my coat, and Brooke and another woman. I later learned her name was Patrice. A friend from Brooke's book club. Were standing near the water fountain, close enough that I could hear every word, far enough that they didn't see me in the dim light. "Honestly, it's exhausting," Brooke was saying. She still acts like it's her house we go to for Thanksgiving, like we owe her something because Walter built it 40 years ago with his bare hands or whatever the story is. Nathaniel doesn't push back, Patrice asked. He tries, sometimes. But he still has this guilt thing about his dad dying, like if he disappoints his mother, he's disappointing his dad too. It's a whole thing. I've told him he needs to set boundaries, especially now that she's older and, I don't know, she's going to need more from us eventually, right? Care, decisions, all of it. I'd rather establish now that we're not going to be at her beck and call. Better she hears it while she's still sharp enough to adjust. Establish it how? Brooke laughed, a light, careless sound. The toast helped. Nathaniel was mad at first, but I told him, sometimes people need a wake-up call. She's been queen bee for 60 years. Someone's got to remind her the throne's empty. I stood in that hallway in my coat, car keys already in my hand, and I understood, finally and completely, that the toast had not been a slip. It had been a strategy. A calculated humiliation, delivered publicly so it would stick. So it would establish something Brooke wanted established. That I was diminished. That my place in my son's life was something to be managed and minimized. That I was, in her words, a queen with an empty throne. I walked back into the auditorium, told Carol I needed to leave, and drove home in a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat over the road noise. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed Nathaniel 1,000 breakfasts before school, where Walter and I had paid bills and dreamed about retirement and argued about paint colours. And I finally let myself think clearly about something I had been avoiding for 6 years. The house, the land, the business. Here is what almost no one in my family fully understood, because Walter and I were private people who never made a show of what we'd built. Walter hadn't just been a contractor. In the last 15 years of his life, he had quietly bought up parcels of land around Asheville, back when prices were low and nobody believed the area would boom the way it eventually did. He built 4 small rental properties with his own hands, paid them off completely, and folded the income into a modest but real family trust. The house we lived in, my house, the one with the garden where he died, sat on 11 acres that a developer had offered me $2 million for. An offer I'd quietly declined 3 times without telling a soul, because I wasn't ready to let go of the dirt my husband was buried 3 miles from. Nathaniel knew about the trust in general terms. He did not know the specifics. He did not know that I, as trustee, had complete discretion over how and when its assets passed to the next generation. He did not know that 4 years ago, grieving and lonely and desperate to feel connected to my son, I had drawn up a new deed with our family lawyer, Mr. Doyle, that would transfer the house, the land, and the trust's holdings directly to Nathaniel upon my death. No conditions, no stipulations, simply love made legal. I sat at that kitchen table, and I thought about a woman standing by a water fountain, calmly discussing how she planned to manage me, until I became inconvenient enough to discard. I thought about my son, applauding, and I thought, they have no idea what they've done. They have no idea what they're about to lose, because they never once stopped to consider that the queen on the empty throne still holds the pen. The next morning, I called Mr. Doyle's office and made an appointment for the following week. I want to be honest about something. What I did over the following 4 weeks was not born from spite. I have turned this over in my mind 1,000 times since, lying awake at 3 a.m., the way you do at 60. When sleep becomes negotiable and thoughts become loud. And I have concluded, with as much honesty as I can offer myself, that spite was in there. I am human, and I had been wounded in the cruelest possible way, in public. By the two people I trusted most in the world, but spite was not the engine. The engine was clarity. For 6 years since Walter died, I had been making decisions from a place of fear. Fear of losing my son entirely. Fear of being alone. Fear of becoming the kind of mother-in-law that gets quietly phased out of family photographs. That fear had made me generous in ways that weren't reciprocated, patient in ways that weren't respected, and silent in ways that had cost me my own dignity. The night I overheard Brooke by the water fountain, the fear finally burned off, and underneath it was something clearer and, frankly, stronger. I was not going to spend the rest of my life funding my own erasure. I met with Mr. Doyle, who had been our family lawyer for over 20 years and had known Walter since they were young men fixing up their first houses together. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, his face growing more still with every detail. "Eleanor," he said finally, "I have to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with the question before you answer. Are you doing this to punish Nathaniel, or are you doing this to protect yourself?" It was a fair question. I thought about it seriously. "Both, if I'm honest," I said, "but mostly the second one." "Frank?" I gave that boy everything I had for 34 years, and the moment I became inconvenient, his wife started planning how to manage me out of my own life, and he applauded her plan. I am not interested in punishing him forever. I am interested in making sure that whatever I leave behind reflects who actually showed up for me, not who assumed they'd inherit me by default. Mr. Doyle nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about your options." Over that meeting and 2 more that followed, we restructured everything. The original deed transferring the house and land to Nathaniel unconditionally was revoked. In its place, we drew up a new arrangement, one with more nuance, more protection. And I'll admit, more consequence than the first. The house, the land, and the trust would be placed into a new structure with 3 provisions. First, a life estate for me, meaning no one, not Nathaniel, not anyone, could touch the property while I was alive. It was entirely and completely mine to live in, sell, or do with as I pleased. Second, upon my death, the primary beneficiary would not be Nathaniel outright, but a newly established fund for Sophie's education and future, held in trust until she turned 25, protected from any claims by either of her parents. Third, and this was the provision that mattered most to me, a smaller but still significant portion would go to Nathaniel, but only if certain conditions were met, demonstrated sustained presence in my life, not performative, not convenient, but real. If those conditions weren't met, that portion would pass instead to a scholarship fund. Walter and I had always talked about creating for kids from working families who wanted to go into the trades, the way he once had. I was not disowning my son. I want to be clear about that because I know how this can sound. I was simply finally refusing to hand him my entire life's foundation on the assumption that love was owed to him regardless of how he treated me. I was making my love conditional in the one place it had never been conditional before, not because I loved him less, but because I had finally learned that unconditional love offered to someone who does not reciprocate basic respect is not virtue, it is self-erasure with better branding. During those 4 weeks, I did not tell a soul except Carol and Mr. Doyle. I continued showing up to family events with the same steady, pleasant face I had worn my entire adult life. I attended a barbecue at Nathaniel and Brooke's house. I brought a pie. I complimented Brooke's chicken backsplash, honestly, because it was lovely. I helped Sophie with a school project about the water cycle. I let Nathaniel hug me goodbye. And I hugged him back, and some small tired part of my heart still ached with love for the boy inside the man, even as the rest of me quietly finished the paperwork that would redefine his future. People sometimes ask me, when I tell this story now, whether that was hypocritical, smiling at the barbecue while planning the deed. I don't think it was. I think it was the last act of a woman trying to hold on to grace, while making a decision that grace alone could no longer sustain. I was not being fake, I was giving my son every remaining chance, in real time, to show me who he actually was. While I quietly prepared for the answer, I suspected I already knew. And the answer came, 3 weeks into this process, at a moment I hadn't planned for and couldn't have staged if I'd tried. Sophie called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice small and worried in a way that immediately straightened my spine. "Grandma, can you come get me? Mom and Dad are fighting again and I don't want to be here." I drove to their house within 15 minutes. When I arrived, Nathaniel and Brooke were in the middle of an argument I was clearly not meant to witness, the kind that had clearly been simmering long before that night. And I caught the tail end of it standing in their front hallway with Sophie's overnight bag already in my hand. She's going to leave everything to us eventually anyway, Nathaniel. So I don't understand why we can't just. Because it's not ours, Brooke. It's her house, her land, her decision, and I'm not going to sit here and pressure my mother about her estate while she's still alive. That's insane. I'm not saying pressure her. I'm saying maybe it's time for a conversation about downsizing, about whether she really needs 11 acres by herself, about whether that money could be doing something more useful because for this family right now, instead of sitting in dirt, she refuses to sell. I did not announce myself. I simply took Sophie's hand, walked her past the kitchen doorway, and left. Nathaniel caught sight of me on our way out. I saw the flicker of shame cross his face, but he didn't stop me, and he didn't follow. I drove Sophie home to my house, made her hot chocolate, and let her fall asleep on the couch watching an old movie, her head on my shoulder the way it used to rest when she was small enough to carry. I sat there long after she'd fallen asleep, staring at nothing, and I thought about Brooke's voice. Calm and businesslike, discussing my land, my dirt, my life, as an asset to be optimized. I thought about my son defending me, genuinely. I believed him on that point, but not defending me enough to walk away from a marriage where his wife spoke about his mother that way, behind closed doors and to her face at anniversary parties. The next morning, I called Mr. Doyle and told him to finalize everything. No more waiting. No more hoping the barbecues and piano recitals would somehow undo what I'd overheard in that hallway by the water fountain, or in that kitchen doorway 3 weeks later. I decided, that morning, exactly how I wanted to reveal it. Not through a lawyer's letter in the mail, sterile and distant, not through a quiet phone call where Brooke could control the narrative afterward. I wanted it done the way the wound had been inflicted. In front of everyone who had clapped. Sophie's birthday party was coming up in 11 days. 40 guests again because Brooke did nothing small. The same country club ballroom, rented again. Chandeliers and all. I would need an invitation to speak. As it happened, Brooke herself would hand me one, without knowing what she was handing me at all.
Sophie's 13th birthday party fell on a warm Saturday evening in late June, and Brooke, determined as always to make every family event a production, had planned a small toast portion of the evening where family members could share a few words for the birthday girl before the cake was cut. She asked me, with the same brisk, dutiful courtesy she'd used at the anniversary party, whether I would like to say something. I'd love to, I told her, and I meant it more than she could possibly have understood. I spent those 11 days finishing the paperwork with Mr. Doyle. And I spent the evenings the way I always had. Visiting Sophie, tending Walter's garden, sitting in the quiet of my house and making peace, finally with the decision I had made. I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Not happiness, exactly. Steadiness. The particular calm of a person who has stopped waiting for someone else to value her and has decided to value herself instead. The night of the party, I wore the blue dress again, deliberately. Some might call that theatre. I call it reclaiming, something that had been taken from me in that exact dress 4 weeks earlier. The ballroom looked much as it had at the anniversary party. Same chandeliers, same string quartet folded into the corner. Though tonight, they played something livelier for Sophie's friends dancing near the DJ booth. I sat at table 6 again, though this time it wasn't an accident of seating. I had requested it, quietly, from the events coordinator, who had no idea why a grandmother would specifically want the table by the kitchen doors. The cake was wheeled out around 8. Sophie, glowing in a yellow dress, blew out 13 candles while the room sang. Nathaniel gave a sweet, funny toast about his daughter, and I watched him with an ache that never fully leaves you, no matter what your children do. The ache of loving someone completely while knowing, clearly now, exactly who they are. Then Brooke stood, tapped her glass and said, "And now, I know Eleanor wanted to say for a few words for her granddaughter." I stood. I smoothed my dress. I picked up the folder I had brought with me, not the photo album this time, but a slim leather folder Mr. Doyle had prepared, containing the finalized documents. 40 faces turned toward me. Some familiar from the anniversary party, some new. I found Carol's eyes in the crowd. She gave me the smallest nod. "Thank you." "Brooke," I said, and my voice, to my own relief, came out clear and warm. I do want to say a few words. Not just about Sophie, though I'll get to her. She is the best of both her parents, and I hope she always knows that. But I also want to say a few words about family and about its honesty, because I think this family could use a little more of both. The room quieted slightly, the way rooms do when they sense something is coming. 4 weeks ago, in this same ballroom, at Nathaniel and Brooke's anniversary party, Brooke gave a toast about me. Some of you were there. She said I had spent 10 years teaching her what kind of mother-in-law she never wanted to be. She said I criticized her cooking, her hair, her place in this family. 40 of you laughed. My son. I paused, and I made myself look directly at him. Applauded. Nathaniel's face went pale. Brooke's smile, still frozen from her introduction, began to falter at the edges. None of what she said was true, I continued, steady, unhurried. I never criticized her cooking beyond an honest opinion kindly given, when asked. I never mocked her appearance. What I actually did for 10 years was show up. I babysat Sophie more nights than I can count. I paid for her braces the year Nathaniel and Brooke were between jobs and never once mentioned it again. I gave up my Sunday mornings for a decade so this family could have dinner together every week at my table, using my dishes, in the house my husband built with his own 2 hands. I opened the folder. I found out 3 weeks ago, standing by a water fountain outside Sophie's piano recital, that the toast wasn't a joke or a slip of nerves. I overheard Brooke explain to a friend that it was a strategy, a wake-up call, she called it, designed to remind me that, and I quote, "The throne is empty." She said she wanted to establish, now, while I'm still sharp enough to adjust, that I shouldn't expect to be a burden on this family as I get older. A murmur moved through the room. Brooke's face had gone rigid. Nathaniel had not moved at all. I also happened to overhear, 2 weeks ago, a conversation in Nathaniel and Brooke's kitchen about my land, about whether I really needed 11 acres, about whether that land, the land my husband bought parcel by parcel over 15 years, the land he is buried 3 miles from, might be better used as liquidated funds for this family, by which I came to understand they meant funds for them. I looked up from the folder and let the silence sit for a moment. The way Brooke had let her own silence sit 4 weeks earlier, right before she delivered the line designed to wound me in front of everyone. So 4 weeks ago, I went to see my lawyer, I said. For 6 years, since my husband Walter died, the deed to our house, our land and our family trust, worth, all told, a little over $3 million, was set to transfer to Nathaniel unconditionally the moment I died. No one in this room but my lawyer and my sister knew the specifics. I want to read you what it says now. I unfolded the document, and in the clearest voice I could summon, I read the essential terms aloud. The life estate that ensured my home was mine, fully, for as long as I lived. The trust established for Sophie, protected until she turned 25, untouchable by either of her parents. The conditional provision for Nathaniel, dependent not on obligation but on genuine, sustained presence in my life. And the fallback, should that provision go unmet, establishing the Walter Whitfield Trade Scholarship. In honor of a man who believed, his whole life, that dignity was earned through how you treated people who could do nothing for you. When I finished reading, the ballroom was silent in a way I have never experienced before or since. Not the awkward, uncertain silence of a joke that hasn't quite landed. A full, total silence. 40 people, absolutely still, absorbing what had just happened in real time. I closed the folder. I want to be clear, I said, my eyes on Nathaniel now. And only Nathaniel, because everything I said next was truly, finally, only for him. This isn't revenge. I'm not doing this to punish you, and I'm not doing this because I've stopped loving you. I don't think I could stop loving you if I tried. You're my son, and some love just doesn't have an off switch, whether we want it to or not. I'm doing this because 4 weeks ago you watched a room laugh at a lie about your mother, and you applauded. And somewhere underneath that applause was a truth I finally had to accept. That I had spent so many years terrified of losing you that I forgot I was allowed to protect myself too. Sophie deserves a grandmother who has her own dignity intact. I intend to be that grandmother for as long as I have left. I turned to Sophie, whose eyes were wide and shining. 13 years old, and suddenly understanding far more about the adults around her than any child should have to learn at a birthday party. Happy birthday, sweetheart, I said, my voice softening completely. None of this is your burden. It never will be. I love you more than any deed or dollar could ever measure, and that part will never, ever be conditional. I sat back down. The string quartet, who had stopped playing somewhere in the middle of my speech, did not resume for a long moment, as if even they understood that music would be the wrong sound to fill that particular silence. Brooke did not speak. She stood at the head table, glass still in her hand, her face the color of the white tablecloth beneath it. Nathaniel put his head in his hands. Carol came and sat beside me a few minutes later, squeezed my hand under the table, and said nothing at all. Because there was nothing left that needed saying. Epilogue. 6 months later. I would love to tell you that everything resolved into a tidy bow. That Nathaniel left Brooke, or that Brooke transformed overnight into a loving daughter-in-law. Or that some dramatic reconciliation scene played out on my front porch, with rain falling solically in the background. Real life rarely offers those endings, and I've learned to stop expecting them. What actually happened is quieter and truer. Nathaniel and Brooke separated 3 months after that party. Not because of the deed, or not only because of it, but because the deed forced a reckoning that had clearly been coming for years. One that neither of them could keep avoiding, once it was spoken aloud in front of 40 witnesses. They are, as of this writing, working through a difficult but civil divorce, co-parenting Sophie as best they can. Nathaniel and I talk now. Most weeks, sometimes just a phone call, sometimes dinner at my kitchen table, the same table where I once fed him breakfast before school. It isn't the relationship we had before Walter died. It's different, more honest, more careful. Built by 2 adults choosing each other again, rather than one exhausted mother hoping to be chosen. He has met, in the months since, every condition I laid out in that trust, not because a document required it, but because he told me this himself, sitting at that table with tears in his eyes. Hearing me read that deed aloud was the first time in years he'd truly seen me as a person with my own dignity, rather than a fixture in his life he could take for granted. Sophie spends every other weekend at my house now. We work in Walter's garden together. I am teaching her to grow tomatoes the way he taught me, all those years ago. In the same dirt where I found him that terrible morning 6 years back. Dirt that is still mine, still whole, still exactly where I want to stand, when the world tries to tell me my time for standing tall is over. I am 60 years old. I built a business, raised a son, buried a husband, and survived a public humiliation designed to make me smaller than I am. I did not survive it by becoming bitter. I survived it by remembering, finally, after far too many years of forgetting, that love without dignity isn't love at all. It's just a slow, quiet erasure, dressed up in family dinners and photo albums and applause. The throne, as it turns out, was never empty. I was just the only one who hadn't realized yet that I was still sitting on it.